Hello and welcome to the Black Flake podcast or show. I named it show. But we got my one of my favorite people in the whole world, Adam Fitzgerald, on again. We're just going to get an update on foreign policy since the last time we talked, and we were just talking about RFK Jr. And what were you saying about that, Adam?
Oh, you know how to make me blush. Thank you very much. No, what we were saying about what Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. was, I never saw a candidate basically de-evolve in the public eye so fast as ever before, and it
Right.
only became when he became affiliated with Rabbi Shmuley Batayak, who was actually considered America's rabbi. He self-appointed himself that, by the way, just like
Of
LeBron
course.
James self-appointed him as the king. But
Do you think?
nevertheless, uh, once he did that, you saw the real Robert F. Kennedy when it comes to foreign policy because he started commiserating with a lot of high-profile Zionist Jewish leaders in the public sphere, especially in New York. And suddenly, all of a sudden, a lot of people turned on him. Now, there's very few libertarians that still stand by him, but his foreign policy certainly isn't libertarian enough and nowhere near it. And that's a big issue, especially with, as I was saying, Ron Paul libertarians.
Well, it's also
Um,
interesting because it didn't aid his campaign at all. Like he basically had to pivot towards donors in order to with his basically his take on Gaza because he was coming from the Democrat Party, sort of the populist Democrats, and they're not super thrilled about the Israel Gaza stuff. So he's trying to go after the populist, and he just made the wrong move. I think even Scott Horton was talking about this, how his whole campaign staff quit over it because they were just like, no, we're not doing this. This isn't the right move at all. Just even politically, not to mention ethically, right?
Yeah, well, I think that he really did miscalculated. He or somebody miscalculated where the overlap in his supporters was. Like maybe he thought that there was more people that the war wasn't as big a deal or something, but I think there was a lot of overlap with like the things that he is good on, the repudiation of the COVID regime and all that stuff that he's still probably pretty good on. But then there's this anti-war issue that I think that there was a lot of overlap between those two people, of the same person holding both of those views. And then when he lost it on the one, he just lost all of it.
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head here, John. Is that I remember when he first came across Rabbi Shmuley Batayak, he actually was in a Zoom meeting with Batayak and an IDF general, and basically he was getting the history of the Israel-Palestine conflict in that Zoom meeting. And I'm like, I don't think RFK was as educated on the subject initially as I originally had thought, because if he's getting a history lesson from Shmuley Batayak and whoever this IDF general was, boy, is he getting a one-sided issue here, right?
No doubt.
And, and
His
he, you never seen Robert F. Kennedy Jr. with the Palestinian historian in the likes of someone like an Edward Said, right? Even though he's dead now, but I mean he didn't commiserate with say Norman Finkelstein, or he didn't commiserate with that
Daryl
former.
Cooper.
Yeah, that's right. Very good. So like he's getting a one-sided issue, and I think he.
well, he did talk to Dave Smith.
Well,
Well, would you consider Dave Smith a, Israel Palestinian historian?
no,
No,
he
but
has a
he
few
he knows
talking points.
right. Like
Right,
I
but
like what
he was
Norman
probably.
think.
I get what you're saying because he's probably better off learning from Dave Smith than
Right.
Shmuley Batayak.
Well, I like
No,
what
no doubt, no doubt.
Finkelstein says. He's like, people act like this is really complicated an issue, but I'm
Right.
paraphrasing, but he's like, but it's not. Well, you're killing civilians and citizens, and it's mass slaughter. And so, yeah, in a way, it's very complicated. It's like the history of the conflict and everything like that. But in a way, it's very simple and like you can't kill innocent people.
Sure. And look, I thought John brought up another good point here. We're talking about a moral standpoint. This is one-sided.
Right.
If you're going to blame it, look, at this point, currently, right now, we have 31,000, I believe with Al Jazeera, it was like 31,200 or 31,100 people dead. About 8 to 9,000 injured. You have 1.7 million people displaced. That number is growing. A lot of people going to the north. A lot of more people going south, and that's near the Rafah border with Egypt.
And
Now,
that's
what's more?
troublesome too.
Right, and not only that, the land is destroyed. It's razed to the ground. You have settlements that are starting to build. You have landowners here in the United States owned by Israeli businessmen who are buying up the land in Gaza City, the biggest refugee center of all, which is no more. So, what do you think the purpose was? What is, of course, was to get rid of every single Arab, indigenous Arab, to the land of Israel, to Jordan and Egypt. And I think that was the plan all along, was to hijack a terrorist incident like October 7th and basically use it as a juxtaposition to basically, slaughter everybody involved and blame it on Hamas. I mean, for God's sakes, the Israeli spokesman, Elon Levy, he still parrots the same old dumb line. And John Podhoretz, the editor in chief of the New York Post and elsewhere, they're basically just, repeating themselves at this point, and it's starting to get old and stale, and a lot of people are waking up to it.
Yeah, well, it's almost like it's the exact same playbook as what the neocons did right after 9/11.
Yeah,
You know, it's
mm,
like history started on 9/10,
mm.
2001, and that nothing before that ever matters anymore, of course, when you have a big terrorist attack like that. And then everything moving forward is, of course, all justified by the big terrorist attack. And that's what's going on now. And of course, there was a lot of money being made during the war on terrorism, and there's still a lot of money being made on the war on terrorism. And of course, there's going to be people that are going to be making a lot of money off of this deal too, going on in Gaza. And I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, well, Tucker Carlson even talked about it in Ukraine here just a few weeks ago when he asked about, like, if winning in Ukraine means that they completely decimate an entire generation of their people and then open themselves up to being bought up and chopped up by BlackRock
Hmm.
and sold back to them, you know, then is that really winning? I mean, that's exactly what's going to go on here in Gaza. They're going to, now that they're being driven out, they're just going to chop it up and buy it for pennies on the dollar, which is essentially what is happening. They're buying it with guns and bullets that we buy and send over there.
I also think that also with not, just to piggyback on your answer there, John, um, regarding the issue of like what we used 9/11 for, was a juxtaposition to go to war with Iraq, Afghanistan, later on Syria and Libya. Well, at least with the Iraq War, it was an illegal war, by the way. We had massive protests all around the world, and one of the biggest protests we've seen in human history. Israel's a taboo subject, and God forbid if you protest against Israel, you're an anti-Semite right away. It's almost
And
like
no doubt,
Scientology. When they go on the defense, they don't believe in defense; they go on offense right away. They attack you. Same thing for Israelis, and we're talking about the Israeli government and its military, not the regular people here. But more
yeah, of
people,
course,
I'm starting to
yes,
see more people come out and become a little bit more vocal. I mean, I'm shocked that I didn't watch the Oscars, but I saw highlights speaking out in Hollywood. It was supposed to be run by, the Jews, right? So here we have people basically speaking out on the platform owned by, the Jewish establishment, but at the same time, also without looking, morally abhorrent, what could the Jews possibly say at this point? I mean, you have a lot of liberal Jews that are speaking out against this, egregious war crime. I mean,
of course,
I've covered this issue regarding the definition of war crimes regarding Israel in previous videos, and all four of the laws in the international criminal courts. You have four laws. You have war crimes, genocide, crimes of aggression, and crimes against humanity, and they broke all four. And the only country on the face of the earth that had a backbone to call it out was North Africa, of all places. And the one
Yeah.
country that experienced apartheid. And what did the Israeli government say? Well, they're anti-Semitic. Well, how could they
yeah,
be?
yeah,
They're
because
the ones who suffered apartheid themselves.
didn't they bring something to the UN or something about
Yes,
it,
yeah,
trying to declare it a genocide or something in the UN? When was it? A couple months ago or something?
yeah. It was just it was 2 months ago. That's right.
Yeah, and then that was that was the protocol. Call them anti-Semitic and then shut them up because we can't be talking like that.
No, and I think it had a reverse effect. I mean, even the criminal courts basically didn't fully blast Israel like they should have, but at least they went to the far and said, yes, according to the definitions of the crimes of genocide, we feel that the Israeli government fits the definition. And so, for the first time in my lifetime, we actually have a foreign government outside the United States that actually agreed that Israel is conducting, by definition, a war crime and genocide. It's
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
happened before, and it took North Africa to do this,
It's
and
South
everybody
Africa,
else should
right?
be ashamed of themselves for not doing it themselves.
Yeah, South Africa, right?
Yeah, was it South
Yeah,
Africa? I mean,
yeah,
okay, thank you for
Yeah,
correction.
South Africa. Yeah.
Yeah,
Do, do you
but
think that,
but the United States is basically just as guilty because they're the ones providing the weapons in this
and the
slaughter, and
money?
their silence is the deafening part. And I think the conservatives, if they're smart in this coming election, hijack this and use it to their own deployment. Say, we'll at least go to the peace table and try to broker a truce, because Biden is basically clearly, trying to say, hey, listen, maybe scale back. At the same time, you're doing backdoor military deals, giving them military aid packages, and it's passing through Congress with overwhelming votes. So that's another issue because
Well,
we
you
have
can
a
tell
Congress.
there's pressure on Biden to. I don't think it's coming from the conservatives, but probably from the left to. I don't like the ceasefire and all that stuff because he's sending aid packages and stuff like
Hmm.
that to try to
Yeah,
bolster the way he looks and stuff like that. So it's.
dropping them on people and killing them.
I
Well,
mean,
it's,
he's
it's
at
similar
least
to
working the prop. It's more of a propaganda campaign than anything, but
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
It's similar to Yemen. And when Biden first came to the administration, one of his first proposals of being president was he was going to stop aid to the largest humanitarian crisis at the time, which was Yemen. And the second week in office, he gave the largest military aid deal to Saudi Arabia in history. And that went straight to the Yemen war. But I mean, all this money to Ukraine, to Yemen, to Israel, it basically, even the hardcore leftists are basically saying, maybe we're stretching it a little bit, but at least we got them talking about it. But I think Biden is finished, and I think the Israel issue really was the nail in the coffin. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on it, if you agree with that or not.
I don't think. Well, go ahead, Ahmed.
No, you go ahead first. You were about to speak.
I think Biden's going to win again. I don't think
Oh,
Trump. I don't think Trump has a chance, unfortunately.
I think they're going to rig the election again. They're going to use
Right,
mail-in ballots. They're going to do something. There's a pandemic happening. Apparently, there's a migrant that had bubonic plague. It's going to be something that they're going to win one way or another. They're not going to allow Trump to come back in office, because if Trump comes back into the office, the Ukrainian money gravy train is done.
hmm.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And there's a reason they're building, the U.S. military right now is building, I guess, a port off of Gaza for aid, quote unquote. But why are there going to be 1,000 U.S. troops stationed there? This is, I believe, is going to escalate, because if Biden wins this war, he's going to give the green light for Israel to go against Lebanon.
I think
Hmm.
it's a
That's
pressuring issue.
sobering.
I mean, it's a terrible election, by the way. I mean, we're going to have, conflict either way. But which conflict is going to cost more for the military-industrial complex, private companies, LG3 Technologies, Raytheon, and Boeing? Who stands to make more? And in my opinion, I think it's basically Ukraine stands to lose. And I think what's happening here is that we're seeing a transition to a more Cold War type era conflict. And I mean, that's China, North Korea, and Iran. And I think that's the last and final conflict. That's what Israel is pressuring for. Iran, by goading the Hezbollah proxy armies into the north of the country, engaging Lebanon at this point militarily. Hezbollah has been quite patient at this point. But I mean, they're still bombing, airports in Syria at this point. And what they're trying to do is break the nexus between Iran and Lebanon and break the Hezbollah nexus itself. Um, this would be a terrible conflict if it comes to fruition. If you're right, John Favreau, we could basically see another 5 years with Ukraine. My horror is that Trump does win and basically acquiesces to Israel's demands, and
Which
that
he
we
will.
engage with Iran, which would be a losing war. Yes, we would win, but did we really win? Economically, we would lose. But
Yeah.
also, if this is a ground war at some point, at one point, we're going to get crushed.
Oh, well, I mean, if we go to a war with Iran, that would be like Afghanistan on like super steroids.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, we lost terribly in Afghanistan. It would be so bad to go into Iran. They will hurt us really badly. And I'm
Most
not
of
talking
them-
just economically. I'm talking like militarily. They will hurt us really bad.
You know,
They're
I've
very
interviewed
capable.
Are
Lawrence
we-
Wilk. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you.
Oh, no worries. Aren't we running out of weapons? Because I know, like, sending so much to Ukraine, they were saying we were running low on ammo and everything. Is it possible for the U.S. to wage even more wars? I mean, they could step things up and everything, but
That's a good question.
does that factor in at all?
Certainly does. The logistics win and lose wars. I mean,
I also
That's
know,
what-
like, we sent $5 billion in that aid package to Taiwan too. So I wonder if that's another war they're looking at funding. But
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, how many wars can you actually fund at the same time? You know?
Well, I mean, this is a dream come true for, like, companies like I mentioned before, LG3
It's a good problem to have if you're a weapons company.
Right. What they can always hire more manpower and make more machines to make more weapons. I don't think there is a shortage of weapons. I just think that there's more demand than there is, for on-hand military armaments. But I don't think there ever could be a shortage of weapons.
Yeah.
It may not get it in time, but I think that basically the military-industrial complex will basically acquiesce in one conflict may get less and one conflict may get more, but in this case, it comes at a human cost and a moral cost that John brings up earlier. And generally people don't like war. During the Bush administration, I do remember that when we went to war with Iraq, yes, initially we wanted revenge, but then soon afterwards, when we started seeing the numbers pile up, people started coming out in droves, and millions of people did this. And like I said, some of the largest protests ever seen in human history. So, in essence, we're going to have a backlash about a conflict, and how many 9/11s can you pull off to blame on Iran, or how many 9/11s can you blame on China or Russia or North Korea at this point? I don't know. I couldn't tell you unless there was something that is so egregious, so huge that basically gets the people's blood boiling again, like we saw on September 11th or September 12th and the week afterwards. But as of right now, I still think people have long memories about what happened 20 years ago, and
I don't know.
they're more questioning of their government.
Well, I don't know if that's true, even though
Huh?
I that's maybe true in some parts of the population. Maybe the younger people are that way a little bit more because it's our futures. But I think the older generation, and I'm talking like 50, 60, 70-year-olds, they still, which they they can vote up till they die. I still think they have this rose-colored view of the government saving us from the terrorists. And I mean, I think that's what they think. And if they and those people and the neocons will definitely use those people to, well, it's like, it's either you're with us or with the terrorists. They'll pull that one back out again
Yeah.
for sure. And that one's really powerful because, as Americans, we're trained from the very beginning to be patriots, to love our country, to love the government, to worship the presidents in our public schools. I think that's really strong still. I'm not as hopeful as you are, actually.
I have
Sorry.
a friend who's like a hardcore Reddit atheist, but he listens to Christian radio all the time, mostly just to
Like,
argue with them in his head.
to dunk on them.
but he gets the news from them too, and so even he's just like, Israel's just defending themselves. There was all this rape and stuff like that, and they're just. And I sent him Dave Smith versus Laura Loomer, the debate, and I showed him the quotes from Netanyahu saying like they funded Hamas and stuff like that, and he's still just like, well, it's just war. And even my parents said this too. When I mean, they don't know much about the conflict or anything, but I was talking to them, and they're just like, well, that's just war. Like, I'm like, all these innocent people are getting killed. They're like, that's just war. So I think like if you like we're looking at this topic and we're really thinking about it and we're looking at both sides. But if you're just someone who's just along for the ride, like most voters are, they're probably just like, oh, there's some ancient conflict over there and they're all fighting over religious reasons. And of course, we're closer to Jews than we are to Muslims. So we're on their side and they're, you know, I think there's a lot of that going on. I do
I agree,
wonder.
Samuel.
I've seen large, protests around the world. I do wonder, like, if you get outside of America, if the concern. I know there was a lot of concern, and we just talked about. You said South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of concern, but I wonder if the concern is growing, and to the point where like action will happen, where there'll be more pressure on the United States, or if it's just kind of we got this many people and that's kind of just where we're at. But I do wonder with like, we're talking 30,000 people, millions injured, more than millions, displaced and stuff like that. At what point does that just register in people's brains that, there is no justification for this whatsoever?
It won't, and that's why I'm pessimistic. It won't ever register in their brains because they're completely propagandized in the other direction. And a propagandized and controlled brain can't even think for itself. And that's a problem. You got to break through that. I think it almost has to get worse before it'll get better for some people. And obviously everybody's threshold on that is different, I think. I think some people are like,
Well,
"Oh, this is bad enough. I'm going to wake up now." But I think the vast majority of the population, life is still too good here, especially in the United States. We've got it too good, and they just kind of want to keep that gravy train going, and they don't even think about it like cognitively or logically at all.
I think too, when October 7th happened, they used that event and to make the propaganda on their side be like, October 7th happened out of the blue, like these innocent people were hurt, we have to have a reaction to defend ourselves. And they realize they make a really big deal about it. They realize that people's attention span is going to wane and they could back off. So like I know that over 30,000 people have died, but like most people probably don't.
Nope.
They
It's not in the headlines.
They're just stuck in that tiny space where all those headlines happen and all that big event happened, and they made their decision then based on the propaganda. And now it just is what it is until something is able to shake them out of it, which that guy setting himself on fire certainly was something. I mean, obviously I don't recommend that, but I don't view him as, people were making fun of him saying it was a terrible thing he did. And it's like, I don't know, if you're suicidal and you're having issues and, you want to try to make a change at something, it's like, I can't look at one person taking an action that will get national news versus, all those people slaughtering all those people and just say like, this guy's bad without looking at, what he's protesting. If it's like, someone once said, to give your life for a friend is, a tremendous thing, but to give it for someone you've never met is just beyond comprehension.
Yep, there's even more.
John, just to ask you, what would, in your opinion, you said that things would have to get worse in order to get better. What would be worse than what is happening right now?
Well, we could. I think inflation would more inflation would be worse, where it really starts to hurt. And I know like some people are like, well, this is bad enough. Yeah, but they're still going to Starbucks and drinking their lattes. When it's too expensive to get a latte at Starbucks, I think that's going to be when it gets worse. And that could happen really soon. And I think that these the wars that have happened, even like the war on terrorism, has been really such a small thing, really. Like, I mean, obviously millions and millions of people overseas were killed, but we in America never see those people, And obviously our media is not talking about them. that terribly much. And, you know, maybe we all know somebody that fought and then died over there in the military, but maybe we know one or two people or something like that. It certainly wasn't like we didn't lose like hundreds of thousands of soldiers like we did in like World War II or something. But I think things are going to escalate here for a while before they get better. That's just kind of what I think. And
well, even World War II, as bad as it was, it didn't make a lot of people anti-war. In fact, that's the war everyone looks back on and says, "Well, that was totally
the last good
justified."
one."
Right.
No, I know, and that's what I'm saying. It might even get worse, and it might get worse still. You know, people might get more propagandized by it by getting worse even. But I think that that's the only way that people are ever going to wake up is when it gets really bad. Because still, like I said, I think we have it too good.
I think they'll vote different when it gets bad. Not necessarily about war, maybe about war if it gets bad enough. I know a lot of people are saying, you know, especially with sending all that money to Ukraine, well, I'm America first. Why don't you just spend it on America? So that might happen.
Maybe. I think this inflation thing really has the thing that could do it, because I think back to when I was younger, when the war on terrorism was really rolling hard, and the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, and people were, you know, getting shipped overseas like left and right. I mean, I didn't serve in the military, and I just kind of lived my life, you know. I wasn't even anti-war necessarily back then. I would have called myself a Republican. So probably supported the war in one stupid way or another, I guess, even if nothing else in my own head. So, but I don't know. I think there's a lot of people like I was still to this day out there, I guess.
Yeah.
If that makes
So in
any
other
sense.
words, what we need is something that will affect the majority of the people here in the United States to basically try to force the change that would benefit everybody else around the world.
Well, one thing we saw after October 7th is we saw a lot of our favorite, you know, we had you on right after that, and it was pretty bleak because, you know, all these major conservatives who maybe were against the war in Ukraine and everything like that, we expected them to side with us on this, and they didn't, and so that was all pretty bleak. But one thing we saw in the weeks afterwards is everyone who was opposing the war, the Israel's war, their accounts, at least on X, shot up, and they got way more popular. And people like Ben Shapiro were getting ratioed, and like some of these other people were getting ratioed. So it's like the one really good thing is we are carving out by doing things like this. We're with the decentralization of being able to broadcast like this, we are carving out a little bit of their propaganda, and we're building our own people that are, you know, paying attention to this stuff.
That's true. That is a ray of hope, I guess, that was not the case in 2003 and 4.
Well, and even just the images that come up. Like, I have never sat down and watched anything out of any of these wars. I just scroll right past it, but still, just scrolling, the things I've seen are just horrific.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why they're trying to pass that TikTok bill. It's going to enable them to go out to websites and apps and be able to censor more than they did, because they were able to censor a lot when Biden was running with Facebook and Twitter at the time, because the people that were, you know, working with the DNC were the owners of these tech industries. But things have changed, and with X coming in, it's a little different now. But with this act that they're trying to push, it's going to make it, the federal government is going to be enabled to basically go in every website, every application that you use, and censor all the information that they want to see.
Do you know if it's going to pass?
I don't know yet, but it's got a lot of support from the House, and this is something that China and Stalin could only freaking dream of doing to their own people.
Yeah, that is the downside with technology, though. The potential for control just goes up.
Regulating information as to who gets to ascertain such information. I mean, you could you could basically pump out a lot of propaganda. I mean, Alex Jones does a pretty good job of this himself. But even he, as big as a platform as he, can't reach 50 million people. So what do you have? You have other smaller channels. You have the media that basically talk about trivial matters and half-heartedly talk about the important issues, but not in the broader picture. So you have foreign countries. I mean, intelligence services like Israel and Japan and France that basically propagate false theories by creating these false profiles online, which we see on X or on Facebook. And basically, that they reach millions of people that way too. But I think this is going to be a problem in the future, like you said too. It is going to be a worry of mine, is that once they start regulating the internet, and they haven't done it so far, but they're on their way in doing so, this might be the turning point for the you know levels of government that they've always wanted, and that they could control the information, control the future by doing so, and basically create propaganda that will seem true to most people. And if John is right and his pessimism is right, usually, and by the way, John, that would be the first time everybody called me an optimist. Usually, I'm the pessimist. Uh, I would have to say, John, your future is as bleak as I originally thought myself. Is that, I think ignorance overall, a general ignorance, will lead to apathy,
I
and
agree.
apathy is the final, the final evolution of evil. Evil. It doesn't matter how much you hate a person, because you have that power to compel us to love. Once you start entering into the levels of apathy, where you don't look at people as human beings, like the mass killers, like Joseph Stalin, or the general who led Unit 731 in Japan, the Nazi doctors in Germany, Joseph Mengele, and also when you start killing people in the masses of thousands, and it doesn't affect you, well, there's nothing worse than complete and total apathy. And you wonder if George Orwell's right in 1984, where he says, "If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever."
Mhm.
So I
Yeah. Well, you mentioned George Orwell's 1984, and I think that that had some good insights, but I also think that Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is actually more
oh,
realistic and more telling of the future. Whereas this apathy that you're talking about is exactly what happened in Brave New World.
mm,
People just stopped caring about anything and everything. They had everything at their disposal, yet they cared about nothing. And that was the future that Aldous Huxley was worried about. And it's like happening before our eyes.
Yeah.
And I just don't see it. It's that pessimism, that's the pessimistic streak in me, is it's just like I don't see it. Well, and
It's
maybe it's just my little bubble or whatever. I just don't see it changing in the near future. I think things have got to get worse before they'll get better. Kind of like you know, in George Winston's case in 1984. It's like he kind of like had to realize like what is going on here, before he kind of woke up
mhm.
in the
I
middle of
agree
the
with
book.
John. I think people have to actually suffer, and with great suffering comes great prosperity, is usually what
Mm.
happens. If you think about it, the most ingenious humanities inventions have always come after great suffering. So,
Yeah, yeah, big problems, if nothing else. Big problems.
Yeah, I've recently been reading The Sovereign Individual, and
Oh, oh.
I just muted you. Your audio is awful, Daniel. Dick, just you can try just joining with your phone. Maybe that'd work. And using your phone audio. But
Well,
he
yeah,
he
that
had
was
some Daniel had some wise words, but I couldn't stand it.
couldn't take it.
Speaking too much truth to power.
Right.
StreamYard couldn't take it.
I don't know if anyone else has been having this issue, but we've been having our phones just randomly call people without us making the phone call.
Nope,
And
that's a
in
new one for me.
in our friend circle,
Oh,
it's been happening all the time. So the joke is that the feds are tinkering, and that's what's going on. But who knows?
Yeah, I don't know either. I don't know. I guess I'm hopeful. I like the fact that Robert F. Kennedy was or Jr. was is in the race. I was really kind of appreciative of him at the very beginning.
Right.
I think that I was kind of like, semi-supportive of him, and then he went on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast recently, and he just, I don't know if you guys all saw that one, but he just like killed it. I mean, didn't kill it like in a bad way, like just he died on that podcast. He started out strong, and then there was that moment of like 5 seconds of silence while he was thinking of like damage control and what he could say, and that was just like, oh well, that just tells me everything I need to know right there. And then it was like right after that, then I heard about this Rabbi Shmuley guy that he's been hanging out with, and I'm like, oh, okay, there you go. No, he's not really concerned about the influence because he is being influenced.
And he's being influenced by the very people that are basically uh, ignoring the problem that is happening in Israel at the same time. And
Yes.
it makes you wonder, like, how could somebody as you know astute as Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. is, as long as he's been in politics, can he be so ignorant about foreign policy? And it's not like it's just some obscure foreign policy. We're talking about the history of Israel Gaza here that directly involves the United States and directly involves in the influence of our federal government. And it makes you wonder just how many more ignorant folk there are in our elected officials
I
in
would
both
say
the
all
House
of
and
them.
Senate. You think it's all of them?
I
I
don't know
mean,
that he's
other than a
ignorant.
couple. I mean, maybe one or two.
I mean, if you just look at AIPAC's Twitter, they say, hey, 93 of our members who are AIPAC supporters won their re-elections. They brag about this stuff. So you
Yes.
have at least a couple of hundred
Right.
members of Congress who take money directly from AIPAC. I mean, they're talking about all this Russian influence. Let's actually talk about the real influence in our politics here.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that I don't know if RFK's ignorant. I think, like I said, he's talked to Dave Smith, and Dave Smith said he's had real conversations with him and stuff like that. He said when RFK did that podcast, he like it was like he became a different person. And I think
Yeah.
it's either A, he's just going after the donor class, so he's trying to, if you want to win elections, we saw this with Nikki Haley versus, Vivek. It's like Vivek did like the populist run. He did everything right to win the populist vote, and he still lost. Nikki Haley did nothing to win the populist vote. She just, her entire pitch was towards the donor class, and she did better than he did. So like that's what it comes down. So he might be just recognizing that he can only win if he appeases the donor class. But it also, like, I mean, he had those plane rides with Epstein and stuff like that. They might
Yeah.
need controlled
true.
opposition. They might be running him just to take the air out of Trump. So maybe if he can out Trump, maybe, I don't know, he can get some of those votes or something. I don't know what the strategy is there, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if RFK wasn't just, they didn't have dirt on him and he's running because he has to.
I think Trump has done everything that they've wanted, though. I don't know if Trump is like some big enemy of the Israeli government. What do you guys think? I mean,
he's just not as robotic as, Biden.
He's
So,
a
like,
wild card, no doubt about it.
They can't just hand Trump a card and say, do this.
That's true.
Trump's going to give him lip. He might do it, but they're going to have to like force it. With
And
Biden,
there's going to be
he's literally just an.
Yeah, there's damage
do whatever he
to be
wants.
done with Trump. They got to control the narrative a little bit more with him.
And you think of like, all these people have billions and trillions riding on politics. You want the guy that will do exactly what you say without any hesitation. You don't want to mess around with like a Trump, someone with like an ego.
It's true.
Yeah, when you're that unpredictable, it's harder to control. So I think that's the problem with Donald Trump is that, yeah, he'll go along, but it takes a little bit more prodding and a little bit more threatening, or maybe something else. Maybe an Epstein type of video will basically reel him in. I don't know, but I do know that people that have worked for Trump here in New York have basically said the same thing universally, and that is he's a narcissist.
Yeah.
Narcissists don't like to be controlled and don't like to be told
True.
what to do at the same time. And a lot of people that, that Trump had initially given official positions to ended up being fired. And they basically didn't like the way that Trump was governing things because he didn't like the things that they were telling him. And so instead of basically acquiescing to those to those points, he'd rather just fire them and replace them. And I never met a president that fired more than half his cabinet in his first term than he did. And it's just basically it goes to John's point that Trump is basically an egotistical maniac, and that's maybe a worry for maybe someone like in the Israeli government to basically say, can we really trust this guy to be straight on the narrow like Biden or like anybody else? But yeah, Trump is a worry. But nevertheless, he wouldn't be anti-Israel. I mean, he's not Bush
No.
Senior. He's, in that case, the Bushes were anti. They weren't really anti-Israel, but they basically didn't acquiesce to Israeli politics, and that's why we don't have like much of a neocon government anymore. But nevertheless, I mean, Trump would basically be a little bit of a problem more so than Biden. I just don't think Biden can win. And he's so old now. I mean, can you imagine 4 years of this guy? He'll
I
be
don't know. He
wandering
did
in
pretty
the
good on the
halls,
State of the Union.
Arby's
I-
or something. I don't know.
I remember when he was Biden was in the primaries, and everyone was like, "No way, this guy can win anything," And then I
Yeah.
saw him pull ahead that first time, and I was like,
Oh, here it is.
"Never bet against the house, I guess." And
Sure,
then,
but I mean, could
and then
if
during
if you're the Democrat, Sam, you got to be worried about saying, hey, you know what, people are going to be worried about Biden's mental health here. Why don't they run Gavin Newsom,
right,
young, energetic, is the governor of the biggest state in the United States,
I don't know
and
why
he
they
does
picked
have
Kamala Harris.
well, the most she was voted the most unpopular vice president in history, so I
Mhm.
doubt she'll get the backing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
but if
didn't make
she-
any logical sense to me. I didn't know what was going on there. It's like you
I
For
have
don't
God's
know.
sake, they're thinking about running Hillary
330
Clinton again.
you have like 300 million plus people to pick from, and you pick Kamala Harris.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
never did
but
figure that one out.
But the interesting thing about that is though they did pick her, and so there must be something there that they saw that they thought they needed. Just because we can't figure it out doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of plan there.
Yeah, the George Floyd thing happened, so they needed a black woman. That's
Yeah, but
literally what happened.
there were plenty of other black
point.
women that they could have chose. Though.
Oprah.
Not in the primary at the time.
Good point.
Yeah, she Bidened it.
Fair.
She was there when she needed to be, and convenient.
So she just got lucky. I mean,
She's-
sometimes that does happen, I guess. But
That's literally it. All her staffers don't like her one bit. Apparently, a bunch of them have quit. But I've been noticing more in the mainstream media, like in the, like Washington Post, New York Times, they are starting to question Biden's mental capacity now. So I think they are prepping to basically move him to the side and put him out to pasture, basically.
I
Don't
also
they-
wonder if they're not just giving into the obvious fact. Like if it's the same as when like COVID happened, and I think it was the Cato Institute was saying, well, look, we're libertarians, but even us libertarians say like we need some lockdowns. So I remember reading that and think, well, even if the libertarians even think we need lockdowns, then maybe there's something to it. I don't know, because I was just young into politics, but I wonder if like the New York Post doesn't just have to put stuff out there so that they have to say a certain amount of truth to build trust. And then
no
they credibility, and then they can wield that in their propaganda ways. That's kind of what I'm thinking is happening. I can't. If they were going to ditch Biden for someone else or pull something else, they would have done it by now.
that's kind of what I think too.
But
He just won a couple primaries today, but so did Trump. He won like Missouri and things like that. Trump did, at least. But Biden just won a few primaries earlier tonight. Either way, Biden is going to be the nominee, so everybody knows that. But Adam, you're right. I don't know why they didn't run Gavin Newsom. He's young, he's energetic, people like him, he's got a nice smile, all the things that they would need in a young Democrat to run, and he probably would be able to pull it off against Trump. But Biden, I want to see what he does during his rallies and things like that, how bad he's going to stumble. Those videos are going to be memes immediately.
I just want to know what kind of drugs they're putting him on.
Oh,
I was gonna say,
all of
you
them.
know it's illegal whatever they're giving him.
Right. Maybe he's taking the cocaine.
It was a newsflash. It's Biden's cocaine. Well, it was a Biden's cocaine, one way or the other, probably.
Someone was saying like the cocaine in the White House. That could have been anyone's. I'm sure they're all on cocaine.
No, for sure.
Jeez. They got to be on drugs, those people.
Right.
To make the daily decision. It takes another thing too. People don't really take into effect about the psychological impact of people, even in Congress. Yes, even people that make disastrous decisions. There's got to be some level of empathy in some of these people where they basically say, maybe I should have done a better job, or maybe I shouldn't have passed that bill or helped to pass the bill itself. There has to be, at some point, a collective consciousness where they're basically saying, we can't go that far. And so far, I haven't seen it. And in regards to what's happening in Israel, when is enough enough? I mean, so far, 30,000 isn't enough. So what is the next number? If it's 50,000, 100,000, 200,000? I mean, the people have spoken out. What about the people in Congress? Are they that afraid, or are they that well paid by the lobbyists such as the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, also known as AIPAC? How much is enough? I mean, is it $30,000 a year enough for the cost of 30,000 people? I don't know. I don't know when that's going to be. But like John said, and it seems to be that way, that it has to get worse in order for it to get better. And, the power is in the people, and the people have to believe that. And once they start realizing that the whole left and right paradigm is nothing but a transparent ploy to control them and keep them divided from each other, once they realize that, it's when they get the power back in their hands. But until then, we're going to have a very, troubling future if the people still believe that the electoral process still works in their favor.
Well, you ask how much is enough, and there's a newspaper man that asked John D. Rockefeller that same question. How much is enough, Mr. Rockefeller? And he said, just a little bit more. And when you don't view, when this apathy has gotten into your system so much that you don't view that 30,000 people as people, but other than just like pawns on a chessboard, well, there is no number that's enough, I don't think. Just more and more and more and more.
When Ford got his first million, they asked him what he was going to do next, and he's like, I want another million.
Yep.
So, yeah,
and $1 million back in like the 20s was an insane amount of money.
Right.
Well, and John D. Rockefeller was the richest man in the world for a long, long time. He just always wanted more. And it's not even the money, it's the power. That's what it is.
Well, I think Andrew Tate was actually talking about this, and he can't trust anything he says, but he was saying, like, once you have a certain amount of money, you don't think about money anymore. Like, if you need it, you got it. You just talk to the guy. It's there. So then it's something different at that point.
Yeah, I could see that being true. Yeah, well, I think it's power. I think power, and I think that like normal people that don't have power, look at the powerful and are like, is it just power? Because I don't see it as being that big of a draw, but I think for the people that actually have power, that have actually like felt it, I think it is such a big deal to them that that is what they want, and that is the driver. Like people like us, we don't see it, and we don't understand it because we've never had it, and we probably never will.
Well,
but
think of it like
if only someone would have written a book about that.
I know, it seems like there should have been a book written about that.
Fill me in.
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay, yeah. But I was, it's like the Olympics. I would never have what it takes to do what they do. Like, I don't want it bad enough. I would not kill myself running every single day over and over again to get that. But for those people that do that, they achieve amazing things. And so when you think of people striving for power, they're doing the same thing. So you got like a filtration system where only the most greedy people, the most hungry people for power are going to reach those levels. And once they reach those levels, they're not just going to try to change the world for the better. They got there by, basically being evil, by making crooked deals. This is their life.
Well, and I think that the power thing is like, I think it's actually one of the things that we can actually draw from to bring it to religion just slightly is from the Bible. Actually, is that one of the ideas that flow through the Bible through the whole thing is the fact that we want to be gods. Like we want to be gods of our own life. We want to be just gods in general. And what is a god? A god is a all-powerful being, and that's what we want. That's our strive. That's our goal. That's one of the things, that the main thing that drives us deep down inside. And I think that in itself is enough of a drive to make some people who are driven to achieve that goal to do some terrible things.
There's a great quote in Manhunter. It was a film in 1986, which is the prelude to Silence of the Lambs, where basically Detective X, Hannibal Lecter, he goes, why does killing feel good? And Lecter says, well, killing feels good to God because God has power. And if enough people does what God is, does what God does, one becomes what God is. And you have to wonder if that's what power really is, the power to have, dominion. The Marquis de Sade, the French author, austere sexual pervert author, basically said that human dominion is more powerful than sex. And, it is something else to realize that when you have another person, helplessness before you, and you're total, complete control over this person, it becomes quite intoxicating if you basically leave out the empathy part of yourself and basically, become, that which is the ultimate form of evil, which is, apathy. And I wonder how many people lack it in the highest positions of government.
Right.
Well, I think that in order to get to certain positions of power, one must suppress feelings of apathy for a very long period of time. And
Right.
and practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. And so if you practice suppressing your empathetic thoughts and feelings for a long enough period of time, you will become less and less empathetic over time. And I think that's what these people do. And that's like politician 101 is to do that over and over and over again. And I think it's like the system that causes the problem, right? I mean, that's what we've got going on here. And it only grows exponentially too. Like, in order to become president of the United States, you probably have to become extremely non-empathetic because you have to suppress that so much to get to that position of power. I don't know. It's a theory.
Yeah.
No, I think, let me hijack that for a minute. I have interviewed Lawrence Wilkerson, the assistant to Colin Powell, Secretary of State under the Bush administration, and he said to Obama once that, now that you're the president, you're going to have to make some rough decisions, and one of them is, can you agree to kill people? And Obama unhesitatingly said yes.
That's
Yeah,
not a
didn't even
big
think about it.
surprise at all.
So, I mean,
Well, it kind of that's like not proves my point, but that's evidence, I guess,
right.
to what I'm saying,
Right.
to some degree.
Well, and if you lie to others long enough, pretty soon you'll be lying to yourself too. So
Yeah. And
there's
if you
that.
say this, if you say a lie to yourself over and over and over again, then you can think that that's even true.
Because
Like,
part of sales is you have to believe in whatever you're selling. Like that's the ultimate way to sell it. Is if you really believe in it, you're gonna sell way better than if you don't. So like the first sale is to yourself. And, for these
True.
politicians, that's what they're doing. They sold themselves that they're Israel needs to defend itself by bombing its own citizens.
and I'm the person to do it.
Right.
I'm the person to lead the way.
So how come we never got any hope and change? I guess he sold it really well, though.
He didn't sell it to himself though, because he knew it was a lie. He reminded himself every night before he went to bed, it's just a lie. It's just to get me in. It's just to get me in.
What's crazy, like everyone was like, "Oh, Obama got caught, not wearing a mask at his birthday party." It's like he didn't get caught. He didn't care.
Exactly.
It's like with so many of these, they got caught, blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, some of them got caught. Most of them probably just didn't care. Like they're in charge. That's part of being in charge, is you get to do whatever you want. You get to be like Chris Christie sitting out on that chair by the beach that you just cleared off. Like they don't care.
No, and that's the worrisome future, right? The worrisome future that John talks about. And I try to be an optimist, but yeah, I mean, yeah, that's my worry. The worry is that the world becomes, very indifferent toward human suffering, and I know talking about Israel is a taboo subject. I know it is, but there has to be some level of saying, you know what, that's enough. And we've seen it in the people, but we haven't seen it in the areas of government yet. And that's the worrisome part, is that if they're allowed to do that and can get away with it, they got to be thinking, what else can we get away with?
Right.
And that's
Yeah.
For the future.
And I think part of the problem is like, and whenever you argue with like especially like arguing with a conservative person about like supporting wars and stuff overseas, they're like, yeah, well, if we don't help them, then they'll just get all murdered or whatever. Like if we don't help Israel, then they'll just be wiped off the face of the map. I'm like, perhaps, but we already know what our help is allowing them to do to other people. Like it's not a like, if we support Israel, like nobody's dying. It's like, no, we're supporting Israel, and like a lot of people are dying. So like, how about we just quit and then maybe let the chips fall? And if you're not constantly feeding wars, they can't keep fighting wars. And that's what we're doing.
It's kind of like you look at the Palestinians, and they're all, you can look at the right, who's a lot of times saying, "Oh, we need more free speech and whatnot." But you rewind a little bit, and they were the ones imposing censorship and stuff like that, and now they're back to imposing censorship with right now with this issue.
TikTok,
but it's like,
and all that, yeah.
Anytime you're losing, you push for peace, you push for freedom, you push for these types of things because it benefits you. So like, if we stop funding Israel, they would change their tone. They would start pushing for peace. They would start doing whatever they needed to do to survive.
For sure.
And that's what should normally happen. We shouldn't be tipping the balance by basically robbing all these people and just dumping tons and tons of money into these people, making them far powerful than, their neighbors. And that's going to cause a power imbalance and, evil to happen, I guess.
And then like take the name Israel out and just put Ukraine in. Or take Ukraine out and put Yemen in, or take Yemen out and put Somalia in. Like, it's all the same. It's the same problem in all these places that we're fighting wars and supporting wars.
And it's not great. This war isn't great for Israel. It's definitely not great for Ukraine. I mean, they're running out of people. That's a crazy thing to think about in a country, to run out of people.
Adam, maybe you even know this, but I heard the other day that the average age of the military age man in Ukraine is 44 in their army right now. Is that like right? Have you heard that stat?
Yeah, recently I've heard about this through Bloomberg.com actually, and what they're doing now is even worse. Is actually they're just taking people. And there's videos of this on Twitter. I refuse to call it X, but they're taking these conscripts, these 60-year-old men, and throwing them in the back of trucks, trying to serve at the front line because they're running out of people to serve.
Right.
And so, by the way, this is actually a war crime. So, and the United States is not calling them out for it, obviously. But
obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I think the age is like 45 to 48 years old or something.
Like the average.
And it keeps going up.
I had the same reaction as you, John.
Like year or something like that.
Every time I hear a stat like that, or I see a recruitment video and there's a bunch of old guys, I'm the same way, where I'm like, that can't be real. they can't actually be running out of people.
Yeah. Well, and I'm like, okay, so I'm 39 years old and turning 40 in 2 months. And I'm like, if the average age in that military is older than me, they're screwed. Because I would not have the physical capabilities to go fight a war in Ukraine.
Well,
But,
even the
no.
Pentagon leak, I guess it was a kill ratio of 7-1. So like it takes 7 Ukrainians to kill 1 Russian.
Yeah.
You know, that was just what was leaked, and I mean, I've heard people say it's as bad as like 11-1, or this or that. You think of like World War II, where it was like 1 to 1.2, and that was the change in the battle. That's how we won. It's like we're not even. It's almost like we're not talking about a war. It's just a complete slaughter, which in some ways is just what war is. But
I usually flip it when I hear American media say that Ukraine is basically gaining ground. I usually say, well, it's actually the reverse. They're actually losing ground. They're losing conscripts and they're losing soldiers at the same time. And this is the reason why we're pumping billions of dollars into them to buy,
Right.
bigger weapons. And we're not basically telling the truth about how many are actually dying there. Because if they notice that, Ukrainians are dying by the bunches, maybe we should stop this war. That's not what they don't want. They want the war to continue.
I don't.
At the cost of Ukrainian lives.
So I don't understand. Okay, so let's just pretend that the 7-1 ratio number is correct. I don't understand how that is even possible. I mean, unless the Russian army is just like really, really, really badass, which I have a hard time believing that, considering like 20 years ago they were practically a third world country at the fall of the Soviet Union. Well, 30 years ago.
30 years is a long time.
Well, I know it is, but
for development. I mean, you look at how fast I think Taiwan came out of nowhere when they had some freedom,
but
even Germany.
Supposedly Russia has
Look
like
at Germany.
the same GDP. Well, I know, but see, their GDP is so much higher. Supposedly now the Russian GDP is like the size of Italy, or at least it was a couple of years ago. And I mean, we know that the Italians wouldn't be able to have a 7-1 kill ratio in the United States and NATO-backed Ukraine. So I don't know.
The Russians have the biggest economy in Europe right now. Those sanctions did nothing but strengthen them.
True, I do know that. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just weird. Like, how are they so much more effective, I guess? I mean, historically, my understanding of Russian military history is that the Russians are usually very ineffective on the battlefield. They usually have superior numbers, which allows them to take heavy losses, yet still carry the day just through sheer numbers alone. And usually their military hardware is very much inferior to whoever they're fighting. And it's just sheer numbers. And I mean, losses, severe losses too. But it seems like this is kind of like a role reversal on their historical record, I guess, when it comes to military matters. So I don't know. It's just kind of strange to me, and I haven't done a lot of research on it, but you can't really hardly trust any research that you could even possibly do on this in this situation either.
Well, isn't Ukraine kind of, back in the day, it was basically just rural Russia, right? Like they weren't the most populous. They were like the grain and Russia had all the populous cities and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that straight off hand.
Well, I'm just saying it would make sense, like if you think of it like Russia, if you think of it like Russia versus Russia, and you could take like the most densely populated part of Russia versus the rural part.
The Russian manufacturing centers generally are further east than say like Moscow. It's like Moscow and then south and then east towards like the Ural Mountains and stuff. So. Yeah, I guess Ukraine probably didn't have the manufacturing and industrial centers that like central and west central Russia does. So that's probably true. Yeah, but Ukraine is being backed by NATO and the United States. We've sent them billions of dollars and God knows how many rounds of ammunition. Now, granted, the Russians have a shit ton of ammunition too, so maybe that's just And they've had shit tons of ammunition
is
for a long
crazy.
time.
It's crazy how they haven't ran out.
I mean, I actually have some Russian ammo in my basement. So, I mean, that I bought from Russia 20 years ago. So, I mean, they
Wow.
had so much extra that they were even selling to us, So,
I recently saw a report saying that Russia's actually the production right now for ammunition and munitions of any sorts are significantly better than what the West is able to output at this point. Like it
heard
seems
that.
like they have been prepping for this war for a couple decades, and they are on par with pretty much every NATO country. Because let's be honest, they are knocking HIMARS and Patriots and Abrams like they're nothing. And then you also have to think they were able to get a lot of support from both Iran with their drones and China with some of their military tech and their spy satellites. They're going to win
True.
this. And I've said this since the very beginning that Russia is going to win this war and NATO is going to walk away with egg on its face as usual. And then they're still going to try to say, "Oh, we claim victory because we saved Kiev" or something.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said.
Well, I think
just
their
don't
goal was
understand it, I guess.
to bleed Russia, and I mean, I guess that still is their goal. I don't know if they've had any success with that at all, really, but
No, they've made them even more stronger and richer than they've ever been now. They literally did the complete opposite.
it's just
Like,
crazy.
And most Russian citizens are happy with Vladimir Putin. They are really good right now.
That is what the polls say. Now, I mean, I have a hard time believing every poll, but which obviously you know that. But
I think there's a pretty significant just in the last 20 years, the propaganda on like Russia being still this Cold War era country in decay. That's just been the narrative. But I think that's pretty obviously propaganda at this point. I mean, even like when Tucker did his interview, just talking about how beautiful the city was. It was clean. There wasn't litter anywhere. People have self-respect. It's just, you don't have that kind of a culture if your culture's in decay.
Yeah, and
it's possible.
A lot of there's a lot of anti-communist propaganda. Like, some of it's good. Obviously, I don't believe in communism, and I think it's terrible, and a lot of bad stuff happened out there. But and I haven't looked into this hard at all, but I do wonder how much of it was just propaganda, where they, exaggerate things, Hollywoodize things just to make Russia look bad. I mean, we've been having the Russia scare for quite a while, so I don't know. I'd have to go down that rabbit hole, but
it makes me wish I had gone to Moscow in 2007 instead of going skiing in Switzerland. It was me and my buddy we're in Europe. We were like, we're either gonna go to Moscow or we're gonna go skiing in Switzerland, and we chose skiing in Switzerland. Kind of wish I had gone the other way now. Maybe it would have been more relevant.
Yeah, no, I've thought of that too. It'd be fun to visit some of these places, but not Gaza though.
No,
unfortunately, no.
Sounds a little hot and dry to me. Maybe a little explodey too.
Right?
Yeah, they had nice beaches.
Well, we'll see in the next upcoming months which conflict will be escalated and which will de-escalate.
Do you predict one? Do you predict that's going to happen? One's going to go up and one's going to go down?
Yes, and I think we're seeing it with Ukraine and Israel. Actually, I think we'll see a switch from Ukraine to Iran. I think the next election will determine which route we will go. Whether it's Biden, whether it's Trump. I happen to think it's Trump, but I was wrong because I said DeSantis will win the Republican primary, and I was a failure there. Nevertheless, I think Trump could pull it off. But if you are right and Biden basically, has shenanigans going on his side and he wins, one thing I could see coming out of that is a breakdown in civil society where we have extremists from the Republicans break off and start committing, riots or whatnot, and this will be, bring about the National Guard and whatnot. I think we're right there at the precipice anyway, to see, outbreaks of violence between the extremists on the political side. And this will only escalate tensions further within the country. And usually when there's tensions within the country, there's far greater tensions outside of it and much greater more egregious crimes happening outside of it because we're too busy concentrating on the trivial matters inside here to worry about what's really going on out there. And what's happening is it's being done in our name. While the world basically tries to shake us out of our delusions, it's up to us to basically do that. And whether we do it or not, I still have a little bit of hope where I'm not going to pull the 38 to my head just yet. But yeah, I
Well, me
got to
too.
have some optimism here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if Trump loses, I don't think there'll be any violence from the right. I don't see it, but you never know.
Well, I mean, when you let me put it to you this way, just to play devil's advocate, we've already seen many people within the Trump camp that basically do believe that Biden stole the election. All right,
It's
Right,
true.
that
right,
happening again. Can you imagine that happening again? 4 more years of Biden. You don't think that there's some faction within that Trump camp that would basically say we need to do something about it?
Well, we already saw they're not going to do anything about it. So if it happened again, I don't know.
Well, Adam, to your point, actually, if that happens, I think that the people that are radicalized in that direction are going to realize that the stakes are so much higher when they've been watching what they already did to those J6ers in prison
they're
and
going to
stuff
be put
already.
down hard and fast, and they're going to be made an example of, and no one will dare go that route. I mean,
Yeah,
if
but
January 6th was happening right now, I wouldn't go film it. I'd stay home. I don't want to end up in prison just
yeah,
because, even
but
if
you're
I didn't
not
go in, and I was
you're
just
not
there.
you're not radicalized though. You actually
Yeah,
would be
that's true.
thinking about it. So I know you wouldn't. I wouldn't either. But there are some people. I mean, there's all people on the whole spectrum out there someplace.
But
And
if you know enough
I
to be
think
radicalized, you know enough not to do that, probably.
I know,
Well,
but
Sam, to you, those people are a warning, but to the more radical, those people are martyrs. And so, I mean, you have for every person who was there at the rally last time, you could have 10 or 100 people next time, because
True.
they're
I
literally
follow
now
the
they're
election
now
guy.
they're a flag to rally towards. Yeah, see,
Right.
I mean,
I'm a big fan of that guy.
but
He
they
was
also
He was in a different capital, and there was a lectern there, and he just took a picture of himself poking it.
hilarious. But I think that yes, they're martyrs, Daniel, but then in a different sense of the word, they're also a warning that, like, if we're gonna do this again, we better do it right, or
Right.
whatever they think is right, I guess, or
oh,
something.
absolutely,
But,
yeah.
but like
So it's
kind of like
probably
you're never
going to
gonna
be scaled up a little bit.
take me alive, because
Yep.
because they know what's gonna happen to them
Well, and they
if
might do
they
like
do get caught.
what Netanyahu did when he funded Hamas. He's like, we need these people to commit violence so that we can, be
Oh, yeah.
justified in putting down this entire population. That's
No,
kind of
don't
what they did with January 6th. It's like, oh, you got these violent insurrectionists, so we need to go after these people. I guess I could see them encouraging violence on the right just so they could, demonize them
Well,
and go
and
after
it
them
works.
even more. Right.
It's a winning strategy. So because those people are nuts.
They
But
did it in Michigan with the FBI and people
yeah.
who supposedly went after Gretchen Whitmer.
Oh yes,
Right.
true.
right.
That was a big deal.
Mhm.
Patriot Front and the rest of it.
It's another one of those things where I hear about it. I'm like, that didn't really happen. Did that really happen?
Yeah, it happened.
Crazy.
I kind of followed that one as it was going on. That was nuts.
Well, what do you guys think it's gonna be the future of Gaza, like in the next year, 5 years? Do you think the end goal is to just push them completely out of it, or?
Yes, they're all going to be pushed out of it or they're going to be pacified. Israel doesn't want 2 states. And in 2 states, if you look at their maps and stuff, it does not make sense. It's going to be 1 state. That's it.
Right. Yeah,
That's
I never
basically-
thought it would be 2 states. I don't even know if I want it to be 2 states because, if you take people and you separate them, well, then you know exactly who to go after, and you can have that conflict. But if you mix them together, it's a lot harder to wage a war. You can't. I mean, you couldn't just go through Israel and bomb, Israel proper and just bomb all these buildings and stuff. So like when they had those settlements in Gaza, someone said this, when they had those settlements in Gaza and they pulled all the, I don't know what to call them, Israelis, I guess I'll call them
Israeli settlers. Yeah.
Israeli settlers out. Like someone said, they're just going to be like, sitting ducks, I guess, basically. And that's exactly what happened. So.
Yeah, October 7th was terrible because you have a lot of these Arab nations that were ready to normalize with Israel and things like that. But honestly, it still makes me think it's a false flag. Like somebody in Netanyahu's office contacted somebody in Hamas and said, hey, we need a favor done because we have all these protests during the judicials going on right now, and we're trying to pass some laws, and we're about to basically collapse the government if we don't. And this is just my conspiracy theory brain going on. So who knows?
Well, I mean, that's even me like talking to my friend. I'm like, you're talking about, you've seen like the Iron Dome, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, you've seen like, this is one of the most monitored places on the planet, if not the most monitored places on the planet, Gaza. So you have like, and he's one of these people that believes how dangerous they all are, which they kind of are now, I'm sure. But it's like your next door neighbor, let's just say, has a ton of machine guns and is ready for fighting and stuff. Like you're paying attention. There's no way there'd be a 6-hour window where you're just, or, like if rockets are going over and you have a defense system that can intercept those rockets in midair and explode them, you're telling me people with hang gliders just floated over the wall and did a bunch of damage?
And they didn't respond for 3 days, actually. It was 3 days before Israel sent out a response. In fact, there was a report that came out from Haaretz saying that some of the Hamas terrorists actually inserted SIM chips into their cell phones and were active during these missions.
Really? So they could have tracked them right then. They could have had them in 20 minutes if they wanted to.
Yep.
Well, to make it even worse, there was an article by Jerusalem Post not too long ago where they interviewed the surviving members of the Israeli military that were by the breach, which is called the Jericho Wall. And they said that for months they knew something was happening near the Jericho Wall because they've seen these white trucks that Hamas was using. They were digging ditches underneath the wall. They were building, stationary items near the wall, and they were reporting this to superiors. And the superiors basically said, "Don't worry about it. They're just farmers, and they mean no harm." Meanwhile, you have these soldiers that basically were blowing the whistle about something big was going to happen. And basically they were all ignored. And later on, one of the surviving soldiers that managed to be interviewed by Jerusalem Post was a woman who basically was awake in the morning. And when the breach happened, she was the only one that survived right by the southern part of the Jericho Wall. Meanwhile, she had like 5 other male soldiers that were actually killed during the breach. So, I mean, for months, they knew something was going to happen. And it's not just one soldier. It interviewed like 6 soldiers that survived this and saw what was happening, and their complaints and their worries went ignored. So you basically wonder if they said, you know what, in order to get these people out of here, in order to save Netanyahu and his corruption charges, he was facing 3 of them, but he still won prime ministership, and meanwhile tens of thousands protested in the street against it. It makes you wonder whether Ahmed said was correct. His conspiratorial points that he's worried about, I think it makes sense, because if you want a cover up of Netanyahu's corrupt government, if you want to take advantage and finally get rid of the Palestinian problem of Israel, why not allow October 7th happen? And, Israel loves to say that October 7th was their 9/11. Well, it's similar to 9/11 because for months, even 16 months prior to 9/11, we had intelligence about Al-Qaeda operatives inside the United States training at flight schools. And yet all that was ignored too. And I've interviewed some of those people that blew the whistle on that as well. But, it benefited for, the very top. So I'm not going to basically say that the entire Israeli government knew about this. You don't need to have many people. You just need to have enough at the top to make those decisions, not to act, and then to take advantage.
Well, George
did they
Carlin,
have warnings from Egypt as well?
Yes, they did. And we did. The Americans got warnings from Egypt during 9/11 too.
That's right.
Oh, did we? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, because a couple of those guys had been in trouble in Egypt before that.
Honestly, Egypt is probably our greatest ally if you think about it. They try to save our ass a few times.
Yeah, I should pay attention to Egypt and follow stock market or something.
Well, Well, Egypt. By the way, speaking of that, Egypt is the largest. And we give Egypt more money than any other country on the face of the earth. Israel, I think, is second, something like that.
Really?
Yeah, Egypt is the greatest benefactor when it comes to foreign aid.
It's all about the Suez Canal.
Yep, I was
Is,
going
is
to
a
say
big
it.
part of it.
Okay.
There you go.
Wow.
Bingo. Sorry.
It's a payoff for their peace with Israel from the 6-Day War, and is it 6-Day War? Yeah, I think
It's
so.
the 1956 or 1959. It's when the British
Yep.
and the Israelis tried to take over the Suez Canal and
Yep.
Egypt won.
Yep. So it's basically their payoff after that one, and then of course just to maintain the Suez Canal in our favor.
Hmm.
Yep.
Learn
Yeah,
something new
well,
every day.
I think it's interesting that I don't know if you guys know this, but Benjamin Netanyahu's older brother was actually the leader of a special operations group that freed a bunch of Israeli hostages that were taken on an airplane by the PLO, actually back like in the 70s or early 80s or something.
Oh yes.
And his older brother was the only Israeli that died in that raid where they freed a bunch of those hostages and stuff. I can't remember which African country it was that they were in.
Algeria.
No, it was Southern Africa,
What
like
does PLO stand for again?
Palestinian
Palestinian
Liberation
Liberation
Okay.
Organization. Yep.
Yeah.
Yasser Arafat and all those guys. So, anyway, yeah, the PLO had hijacked an airplane with a bunch of Israelis on it, and then they landed in an African city.
Uganda.
It was Uganda because it was Amin was the dictator at the
That's
time,
right.
actually.
Idi Amin
And
Dada.
then, yep, Atta, yeah, and then so then anyway, yeah, they did kind of a special operations thing there and freed a bunch of those Israeli hostages up. But then Benjamin Netanyahu's older brother was the leader of that special operations group, and he ended up dying there that day.
Hmm.
So, you know, how much of this is just purely personal for him too? You know?
I mean, they got
Yeah,
back at Yasser
The name of
Arafat.
that operation was Operation Entebbe, I believe.
Was that the name of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember the name. I ran across that. I kind of like put it all together when I'm like Netanyahu. That sounds familiar. I was like reading about that operation, maybe even just simply on Wikipedia or something. And I'm like Netanyahu. I wonder. And then I looked it up. Yeah, they're brothers. It's crazy.
Hmm.
Small world, right? But
Very small world for them.
no doubt.
Yeah, but I have to agree. The future of Gaza lays in the hands of the Israelis, unfortunately. And I think what's happening is that they want it to be an Israeli-only state. And I think that was the goal all along. They basically put up with the Palestinians, and that's the reason why they gave life to Hamas when they were originally called Mujahideen al-Mujahideen, led by Sheikh Yassin. It was to basically offshoot the PLO and basically stopped the sympathy for the Palestinian problem in the 1970s and 80s. And now the monster grew out of its hands and basically is now a headache for Israel. So October 7th was basically a godsend for Israel, predictably. And I think they're reaping the benefits of having all the Palestinians moved out of the country. And I think that was the goal all along. They just didn't, they really couldn't just do it without having a certain backlash from from the world itself.
From the
But
international
with
community, yeah.
right with the terrorist attack, you could basically say, you know what, they deserve it. And believe it or not, you got people like Ben Shapiro and Laura Loomer. You talk about, they basically say, well, yeah, these people do deserve it. And I'm like,
Right.
how can they basically say that? I think now it's like 13,000 children that are dead, more children than any war in the past 25 years combined. And I'm like, wow, that's, it's absurd. And yet, you people, Zionists, these Zionist supporters from the very far right that basically make excuses and say, well, they would grow up to be terrorists anyway. I mean, we don't say that about anybody else, nobody
Right.
else besides them. And,
Well, it's also
it's
like
just,
they funded Hamas, and now we're being told they're trying to get Hamas, and they're just
Mm.
accidentally killing all these civilians.
Mm.
But it's like, I don't even know if they're targeting Hamas at all. How do we know? Like, they're probably for all I know, they're specifically not targeting Hamas so that they can continue to, drive out the Israelis the Gazans and kill all of them. Like,
Does make you
I don't
question.
see I don't see a connection to them actually targeting Hamas. And I don't I'm looking at footage. I mean, they had some of the hostages, escaped and they were waving a white flag and those people got shot down. It's not like they're targeting military people. They're targeting everyone.
Well, there's a famous video that's recently released about this old man. He was killed. He was shot, and they interviewed them. Whoever's behind the camera is interviewing the military young man. Yeah, he was a young man who shot him, and basically said he was coming out waving white flag. We shot him anyway, and they're
Right.
laughing about it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what other country in the face of the earth can get away with such, obvious war crimes? Israel. It's the only country on the face of the earth that could do it, because
There was
everybody
also-
else would basically just ignore it.
Yeah, there was also that report with the pilot, the Apache. I think it was the Apache pilot who was firing at the Hamas vehicles heading back towards Gaza.
Hmm.
That probably had hostages in it, and he said basically, I'm gonna paraphrase this, but he said, "I thought about it, and I thought they probably have hostages in them, but I'm gonna destroy everyone anyway." And then you have this video of all of these cars burnt out on the side of the road, and Hamas was blamed for it. But in reality, it was this Apache helicopter, and basically every one of those vehicles had Hamas terrorists and Israeli civilians in them, all destroyed.
Collateral
Israel,
damage.
Israel
cost of
killed more
war.
people than Hamas did that day. That's what they're saying.
Yeah,
I forget what the protocol.
That was the pilot who was on record saying that. Like, this wasn't
Right.
There was no conjecture here. He was actually telling the story, and so
I forget what the protocol is for that too. That Israel has something about.
It's
You know,
called the
basically-
Hannibal Directive.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
What is that? Say that. I've never heard that term.
The Hannibal Directive is basically a operation, I guess you could call it, that basically simulates it is better to kill the hostages than allow them to be used as bargaining chips.
Interesting.
Hmm.
It's pretty pretty bleak. Jeepers.
It brings a whole new perspective to the
Good
whole
Lord.
freaking thing.
Appropriately named.
Sure is.
Well, so I like the kind of the metaphor that people use that I've heard talked about when people are like, well, they're there, but they're trying to get Hamas. You're going to have collateral damage and all the rest of it. And it's like, it's not acceptable, because you would never accept it here if the cops were chasing a serial killer, like actively chasing a serial killer, and he runs into a school full of children, and then your answer is just to blow up the entire building to get this one serial killer. Like, we would never accept that as being
No, as long as you sent
viable.
out a text like 20 minutes before,
also-
it'd be fine.
Also,
Yeah.
previously you were funding that serial killer.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
serial killer is actually like,
Well,
yeah.
that's why the propaganda is so powerful, because I mean, any movie you watch, there's always this point where, the good guy, he wants to save the innocent person, but he also wants to get the bad guy, and so, like, it's such a common trope where he has to choose.
Yeah.
Like, he has to, it's very, and almost every single time he's a good guy, so he lets the bad guy get away and he saves the person. I think I was watching the gray, it wasn't the Gray Zone, it was the gray movie or whatever, but like, they told him to take the shot, but there was a kid in front of the shot, and they told him to take it anyway, and he didn't, and so he got fired from his job, and he had to, like,
But he was the hero.
Yeah, he was the hero, and then
The point is that's the right
reason-
thing to do.
the reason they wanted to kill that guy is because that guy was exposing them for basically they were killing a bunch of innocent people to protect the world, and that was the big controversy.
I gotcha.
So it's
What's
like, even
interesting,
in
I'm sorry,
your
what-
average movie trope, it's just,
We know what the right thing
we
to
have
do
to
is.
disconnect our brain and put in a different chip every time someone says Israel's just defending themselves and stuff like that. It's just, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, there was just a hop on the Hannibal Directive. I'm looking at a Hebrew newspaper, the Mariv, And there's actually three directives that were applicable to the Hannibal Directive. And they are basically A, during a kidnapping, the main task to rescue our soldiers from the abductors, even at the cost of harming or injuring our soldiers. B, if the abductors and the kidnapped are identified and the calls are not heeded, a firearm must be fired in order to bring the kidnappers to the ground and arrest them. And then C, if the vehicle or the hijackers do not stop, they should be fired on individually, intentionally, in order to hit the hijackers, even if it means killing our own soldiers.
Hmm.
Those are the three directives in the Hannibal Directive.
Crazy.
Wow.
That's crazy when you think about it. But
It's
the
bleak.
It's
chief,
insane.
the idea of chief of staff who came up with the idea of the Hannibal Directive basically said that it is far more honorable for an IDF soldier to be killed than to be abducted.
There's something to it. It's obviously the way they're deploying it now is not okay. I mean, I could see, some situation where that made sense, I suppose, but
Yeah, but it let's the worst thing that could possibly happen is that your IDF soldier dies in the hands of the enemy, and then the other worst possible outcome is that the IDF soldier dies by the hands of the IDF.
right.
So one is kind of a near for sure. The other one is a possibility.
But the idea
So-
is both times you kill the hijacker.
Well, no, only one of those allows you to kill a hijacker, and that is if you kill your soldier yourself and the hijacker.
Right. Yeah.
The other option is you let the hijacker go. I guess they
Oh,
just view
true,
that
yeah.
as being absolutely a non-starter, I guess.
Well, I can
Interesting.
understand if you're a big country and you have a large amount of conscripts. Israel is a very small country, and they don't have many people in the military. I mean, in order for them to sacrifice their own soldiers in such a way, it basically, really defies the long-term goal of having a secure country. But to sacrifice your soldiers for the sake of, killing kidnappers or the enemy, it defies belief. I think so. But when you look at the war, what's going on right now, nothing makes sense. I mean, it's just nothing. And that's what happens when you have a war that basically is not meant on any moral backbone. It's made by
Well, yeah.
people that, made
I-
by people that believe genocide is a worthy cause.
Well, I guess I was kind of thinking about it more like from a moral standpoint. That sounds
Mm.
crazy to have that directive, and even maybe even from a long-term strategic view, it's kind of crazy too because you can't keep that up. That's like death by a thousand cuts if that's what
Yes.
you're going to keep
Yeah.
doing over and over and over again. The best thing for your enemy to do if they outnumber you is just to like try to steal as many of your IDF soldiers away as they can so that they'll kill them all, for you. Yeah,
Well, I
it's
think part of
interesting.
it too is the reason, the Gazans were taking hostages is just because they had previous trades. And then they figured, well, we'll take some people and then we can trade them in and get some of our people out. I don't
Could
think
be.
that's happened at all, but
Probably not. It's interesting.
that did happen in the past. Well, any final thoughts?
Honestly, I think it's going to be resolved by the end of the year because Joe Biden either is going to want to save his election or he's going to want to just torpedo it and support Israel all the way. But that's basically the only choice he has. Does he want to be president again, or does he want to make sure Israel has those? Apparently, there's 1,000 soldiers about to be in Gaza soon. That's why they're building that port. So this is a powder keg about to pop off real soon.
Yeah, well, and we already know the British are in Ukraine, so they got that one covered for now.
No, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
once you put
let me piggyback on Ahmed here. I think that's right. Biden will have to make a very important decision, either to save what's left of the election for himself. Well, that means acquiescing to the demands of the people in regards to a ceasefire. And the United States really has that power. They can do it. Now, it's whether
Agree.
Israel, admits themselves, all right, we got to listen to, the Biden administration in order to save him. Maybe they'll do it. But at this point, it hasn't happened. And as we get closer to the summer months, this is when the things really heat up. And I wonder what's it going to look like. Are they going to force Egypt and Jordan to take in all these refugees? Egypt basically is creating large amounts of these, settlements, but they're very temporary, and they're creating a crisis all to themselves. And I'm pretty sure they don't want to be dealing with 1 million people from Gaza City at their own border. Now, at the same time, you have a lot of people in the United States who are basically fed up with what's going on with Israel regarding their insistence on slaughtering as many people as possible and forcing the expulsion of an entire indigenous people. Well, now the pressure is on the Biden administration to make that decision, whether to really put his foot down or whether he'll end up aimlessly walking in a hallway of Arby's and ordering a steak or whatever. I don't know what he's going to do, but no one else does. But if Trump is smart, he plays his cards right, he's going to be the first person to say, well, if I'm president and you vote me in, we'll stop the war altogether. And I'm wondering when he's going to do that and whether it's going to come up the next not. But we'll see in the future. But right now, I don't see any stopping to what's happening right now. And I think Israel is basically doesn't care what anybody else thinks. And they've already said as much.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. All right, I think we'll end it there. Thanks again for coming on, Adam, and
Thank
Ahmed,
you very
and
much for
John,
having me.
and Daniel.
Thank you.
Always
for
a
having me.
pleasure.
Yep.